Welcome to FilmoraPro, a new way to power up your storytelling. Today we'll be covering different kinds of ways you can curve your motion in the viewer panel and in the value graph so that you can complete your knowledge on how keyframes work in FilmoraPro. This is a more advanced tutorial, so we recommend you watch our Animation 101 and 201 tutorials before you jump into this one. Links in the description. As we've established before, setting two keyframes at different times will make the value change between those two keyframes. And you can affect how these different values change by using different keyframe types. We went over a bunch of those different keyframes in our Animation 101 video, but to recap, we've got the default linear keyframes, which change the values at a regular rate. They show up as empty diamonds. We've got smooth keyframes, which make the change in the value slow down around the keyframes, resulting in a smoother animation. They're represented by half-filled and fully filled in diamonds. We can also adjust the smoothing of these keyframes in the value graph by pulling on these levers here. You may notice that these keyframes turn into circles. This is because by adjusting the smoothing, we're creating Bezier keyframes, which basically just means we're creating a Bezier curve in the value graph. Finally, we've got constant keyframes, which hold the keyframe value right up to the time that the next keyframe arrives. They're represented by squares in the controls panel. Now, everything we've covered so far counts as a type of temporal interpolation, meaning that all these keyframes are based on how the values are changing over time. However, when we're working with position and anchor point, there's a second type of interpolation that you can control, called spatial interpolation. Spatial interpolation determines whether an object is moving between different positions in a straight line or in more of a curved path. Instead of seeing a curve in the value graph, the curve will be visible in the viewer panel. For example, let's create a few different position keyframes with this PNG image. Let's click the circle beside position to create our first keyframe, scrub ahead in the timeline, and then we'll move our PNG image in the viewer to create a second keyframe, scrub ahead again in the timeline, and then we'll move our PNG image one last time. We can see this dotted line which shows the motion path, as we can see here, giving us a bit of a curve. We can also adjust the Bezier curve with these levers here, which will affect the path that our object takes. If we want to make the motion path completely straight, we can fix this by going to the controls panel, highlighting our keyframes, right-clicking, and going to Spatial Interpolation, Linear. Taking all of the techniques we've learned so far, let's create a bouncing ball animation. We'll have the ball moving from left to right as it bounces, and we'll want it to move in a way that looks natural. So let's start by creating a circle which will be our ball. We can do this by going to New, Plane, and we'll create a 200 by 200 square, and we'll make it a nice FilmoraPro purple. Next, let's turn this into a circle by dropping a polar warp effect onto the square and adjusting the end radius to fall within the border of the plane. There we go. You can learn more about how to make different shapes in FilmoraPro in our tutorial about the plane, link in the description. So, let's get started with the animation. We'll start our ball on the upper left corner. Let's click this circle beside position to enable keyframing. Next, we'll go ahead 15 frames and drag our ball to where it would hit the ground. Let's say about here. And then we'll go 12 frames forward and drag the ball back up, but not as high as before. And another 12 frames forward, bringing it back down, about the same distance to the right like this. And we'll repeat the process going 8 frames forward, bouncing up, and 8 more coming down, 4 frames going forward, and 4 again, and then 2 frames forward with a tiny arc and 2 again, and then a very tiny one more frame up and 1 frame down. At the very end, we'll go 14 frames forward and bring our ball to the right as if it's rolling, and then about a full second forward to have our ball bounce back and roll backwards. Okay, that was a lot of keyframes. If we play this back, we'll see that we've got this zigzaggy motion. The first thing we'll want to do is get our motion curves sorted out. Let's find the keyframes where our ball hits the ground and select them by Control or Command clicking them. So all of these down here, anytime the ball is on the ground. And if there's ones you can't get here, you can also select them in the controls panel. So in the controls panel, right-click one of the highlighted keyframes and go to spatial interpolation and set it to linear. We now get these nice arc shapes. I'm also going to fix this first keyframe and bring the lever to a horizontal position so that we can match the motion path of other parts. There we go. Now this looks a little bit more like bouncing, but the speed is all wrong. The ball is moving way too fast when it goes in the air, and we want it to slow down when it reaches the top of these arcs. So to fix that, let's select all the keyframes where the ball is in the air by once again holding Command or Control, and then we'll do a right click in the controls panel again and go to Temporal Interpolation Smooth. Let's take a look at that. Much better. Finally, let's add a temporal smooth in to our final keyframe so that the ball smoothly comes to a rest after bouncing off the wall. And there we go. As we can see in the graph editor, we now have a similar arcing motion happening on the value graph. By combining these different types of interpolations, we've strategically created a very natural looking animation path for our ball. Let's add to this bouncing animation by making the ball compress when it hits the ground. On the first position keyframe where the ball hits the ground, let's set a scale keyframe at the same moment by selecting the scale value and clicking the toggle keyframe button. Next, let's create two more keyframes, one frame before and one after we just created. For our middle keyframe, we'll change our scale on the y-axis by clicking this chain icon and decreasing that keyframe's value to 50%. That's the Y value, so the one on the right. Now when we scrub over it, you can see we have a nice little compression going on. Let's highlight the middle and later keyframes and click this square icon here to change them into constant keyframes. This will make copying and pasting the animation a little easier. Now with these two keyframes still highlighted, let's copy them and paste them at each point that the ball hits the ground in our animation. With the last few bounces, we can decrease our compression of the ball by bringing the Y scale value back a bit. Let's bring this one back up to 75% and this one up to 90%, since the compression will get less and less each time it hits the ground. And there we go. And if we really want to smooth this out, we can go to our clip properties and add a motion blur. So that's a look at how you can create complex animations in Filmora Pro by understanding spatial and temporal interpolation. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on more tutorials on how you can take your editing to the next level. There's no limit to what you can make.